Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My daughter does computer games or something, Dad said casually, waving his hand like he was brushing dust off his suit. He was standing with his law partners at the annual firm dinner, all of them in tailored arrogance and polished certainty. I was passing by just in time to hear it. Again, computer games or something. Not, I built an indie studio from my dorm room. Not, one of my games fund scholarships for girls in STEM. Not, she's up for an award tomorrow. I didn't bother correcting him. I stopped trying years ago. He only believed in things he could bill by the hour. Growing up, I spoke 2 languages, English and pixels. While he rehearsed case arguments in the car, I was sketching character designs on old legal pads. I learned to code by pretending it was a phase. When investors called me visionary, he called it a hobby. Then came the whisper at the dinner. The industry awards are tomorrow. We're presenting, isn't your daughter in tech? My father brushed it off with another stiff laugh. She's not in real tech. She makes games. What he didn't say out loud was the real headline. His law firm had just lost every tech client they had. The startups, the cybersecurity contracts, the AI innovators, they'd walked. They didn't want lawyers who still printed contracts and bragged about fax machines. Meanwhile, at 28, I was nominated for Game Innovator of the Year. My team had just signed our mobile rights deal with 3 of the very companies his partners had lost. And tomorrow, those same CEOs would be sitting in the front row. I arrived at the awards in a black suit I'd designed myself. Sharp shoulders. Confidence stitched into every seam. My badge read, Aria Dalton, founder and creative director, Nova Forge Studios. I took my seat, my phone buzzed. Dad, I let it ring. The host took the stage. Tonight, we honor visionaries reshaping the future of interactive storytelling and tech. When they called my name, the room stood, cameras flashed. My game, the one I coded in a coffee-stained hoodie at 3 a.m., played on the giant screen behind me. I stepped up to the mic. I was once told that gaming wasn't a real career. That imagination didn't pay. That innovation belonged in boardrooms, not basements. But here's the truth. Industries don't die. People just fail to grow with them. Somewhere in the back, I knew he was watching the live stream, maybe choking on his doubt, maybe realizing that his daughter wasn't playing games. She was building the very world he could no longer keep up with. I ended with a challenge. Not to the fathers, but to the daughters. If you've ever been reduced to, she does something, let tonight be your reminder. You don't owe anyone a translation of your dreams. Build loudly. Build proudly. Let the results introduce you. The audience erupted. Not for a girl who did computer games or something, but for a woman who turned being underestimated into fuel. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need him to say a word. My daughter does computer games or something, Dad said, like he was commenting on the weather or dismissing a menu option he didn't like. His tone wasn't insulting on the surface, but it carried that familiar mix of ignorance and polite superiority he'd perfected over years of courtroom victories and country club handshakes. He didn't even look at me when he said it. He was too busy charming his law partners, laughing like the world still revolved solely around contracts, cufflinks, and Latin phrases. I stood a few steps behind him, close enough to hear, but far enough to stay invisible, like I'd learned to do growing up. The ballroom around us smelled of expensive cologne and polished marble, and every man in that circle wore the same smirk I'd seen since childhood, the one that says, if it isn't law, medicine, or finance, then it must be a hobby. One of the partners asked with fake interest, she freelances or just plays around with apps? Dad didn't correct him. He didn't say I'd built something. He didn't mention I had employees depending on me, investors backing me, or a game studio with a global community. He just shrugged, like I spent my time clicking buttons in a dimly lit room. The worst part wasn't the dismissal. It was how practiced it felt. How natural. As if every achievement I'd earned existed in a category beneath his acknowledgement. I remembered being 12, showing him the first pixel art character I'd ever designed, proud and nervous. He'd barely glanced up from his case file before saying, "That's cute, but don't get distracted from real goals." Over the years, real goals became his euphemism for anything that fit within his understanding of success. My world, coding, stories, digital art, online communities, design labs, was abstract to him, a passing trend, a toy box instead of a frontier. When I landed my first internship at a gaming studio, he congratulated me the same way you praise a child who learned to ride a bike, amused, not impressed. When I founded my own company, he nodded but didn't ask a single question. He never wanted details. Details made it real. And real meant he'd have to admit he'd underestimated me. I could have interrupted the conversation at that dinner. I could have corrected him, introduced myself properly, or casually mentioned tomorrow's industry awards. But I didn't. Some truths don't need defending. Not when the proof is already in motion. So I let him talk. I let his partners smile and nod and drink their wine, imagining me as some girl playing Candy Crush in her pajamas. Because while they were laughing at a future they didn't understand, I was busy creating it. I stopped trying to explain my world to him years ago, not out of bitterness, out of exhaustion. Every time I tried to share something meaningful, he treated it like a quirky anecdote. When I told him my first game hit 10,000 downloads in a week, he asked if I'd considered applying to law school before I aged out of options. When I was invited to speak on a panel about women in gaming, he said, "That's nice. Public speaking practice will help when you get serious." He thought dismissing me was harmless because he wrapped it in politeness. He didn't yell or forbid or shame. He just minimized, reduced, softened every milestone until it sounded accidental. When I chose to skip the bar exam and incorporate my studio instead, he didn't argue. He just told everyone I was taking time to figure myself out. I was 23 with a pitch deck, a dev team, and angel investors. But in his version, I was still a kid doodling on a tablet. So I stopped informing him, not in anger, but in self-preservation. I learned to build in silence and celebrate with people who didn't require translation. While he measured success in billable hours and courtroom wins, I measured mine in downloads, partnerships, and players whose lives were touched by the worlds I created. The day my third release hit 1 million active users, I didn't even think to call him, not because I didn't care, but because I knew he wouldn't understand what that number meant. Meanwhile, his firm was thriving the old-fashioned way. Legacy clients, traditional contracts, the same processes they'd used since I was in middle school. They didn't update, didn't innovate, didn't listen. They thought technology was something interns dealt with, and that the future would politely wait for them to catch up. While he was rolling his eyes at my computer games, I was sitting in boardrooms with CEOs who built empires from code. I was negotiating licensing deals with companies whose legal work his firm used to handle, back when they still believed in fax machines. I was hiring animators, developers, narrative designers, UX leads, building something real while he kept repeating the same joke at family dinners. She pushes buttons for a living. He didn't know that by 26, my studio had published award-winning titles and partnered with 2 streaming platforms. He'd never seen the workspace I built, where art tablets sat beside whiteboards covered in story arcs and coding notes, where coffee cups and concept sketches and laptops formed the rhythm of my day. He never asked about my team, my vision, or my goals. To him, I was dabbling. But the truth was simple. His ignorance stopped hurting the day I stopped waiting for his permission to matter. The irony was almost poetic. While he was busy downplaying my career to anyone who'd listen, his own firm was quietly bleeding out. The shift didn't happen overnight. It crept in the way change always does, softly at first, then all at once. Tech startups that once lined their client roster started withdrawing one by one, offering polite excuses that everyone pretended to believe. Some said they were bringing legal in-house. Others said they were streamlining vendor relationships. But everyone knew the truth. The firm was outdated, and no one wanted to be dragged backward. They still billed in 6-minute increments, like it was 1998. They still mailed paper contracts across town and insisted on in-person signatures for deals that could close globally in minutes. They mocked digital legal platforms, right up until their biggest client replaced them with one. They refused to understand the industries they were supposed to serve. How could they? They didn't speak the language of apps, user bases, microtransactions, NFTs, licensing rights, streaming integrations, or cybersecurity. To them, those were buzzwords, not billion-dollar arenas. His partners didn't panic at first. They thought it was a phase. But when 3 gaming studios, 2 fintech startups, and an AI company pulled out in the same quarter, their confidence started to crack. The boardroom whispers grew tense. Meetings stretched late into the evening. Associates got cut. Bonuses were restructured. The firm that once scoffed at innovation now scrambled to understand it without admitting they'd ignored the world changing around them. They didn't know that the clients they were losing were the same companies I'd been consulting, collaborating with, or licensing to. While they were joking about my computer games, I was on Zoom calls with CEOs discussing partnerships and digital expansion. I'd sat at conference tables they were never invited to, speaking on panels about the evolution of interactive media. I'd watched entire industries born from pixels and engines they still didn't take seriously. The week before the industry awards, I heard from a former associate at Dad's firm. He messaged me privately. They're trying to rebuild their tech portfolio. They're desperate. They should have listened to you back then. They didn't think gaming was real business. Real business. The phrase stuck with me because the night Dad stood there at that dinner, making me sound like a teenager with a joystick. He had no idea the consequences of that arrogance were already unfolding. He didn't know his firm was losing ground to attorneys who could draft contracts for digital skins, streaming rights, VR collaborations, and esports leagues. Things he still thought were trends instead of territories. But tomorrow, the gap between what he believed and what I'd built was about to come crashing into the same room. And this time, he wouldn't be able to laugh it away. The night of the awards felt nothing like the world my father lived in. There were no mahogany panels, no leather chairs, no men pretending their jokes were original. The venue buzzed with energy. LED screens flickering with game trailers. Developers in sneakers standing beside executives in silk gowns. Sound designers chatting with tech founders who'd built empires from keyboards and caffeine. It didn't feel like an event. It felt like a declaration of the future. I arrived with my team, artists, coders, writers, animators, people my father would never recognize as professionals, simply because they didn't carry briefcases or wear suits. My badge hung around my neck, my studio's name printed boldly across it. No one here asked if I did something with computers. They knew who I was. They'd played what I'd built. Back at the dinner the night before, one of Dad's partners had made an offhand comment. Aren't those tech awards being live streamed? Maybe we'll see someone we know. Dad had just chuckled and said, not unless they start recognizing hobbyists. He had no idea the ceremony had his firm's former clients in the front row, and one of their keynote presenters ready to mention my studio by name. When they announced the first major category, the spotlight cut through the room like a clean strike. This year's nominees for Game Innovator of the Year have reshaped interactive storytelling and redefined what global digital engagement can look like. My studio's title sequence played across the towering screens behind the stage. Every task, like catching the colors of the worlds my team built from scratch. The applause that followed didn't feel like praise. It felt like proof. As I stood and began walking toward the stage, flashes burst across the room. Reporters, creators, bloggers, influencers capturing the moment. I could almost picture my father sitting somewhere in his living room, scrolling past the live stream, just in time to see my name cross the screen in bold, undeniable letters. I didn't rush. I didn't smile too quickly. I let the sound of the audience carry me forward. People clapping, not because I was someone's daughter, but because I was someone in my own right. The host shook my hand. My face lit up on the screen above us, and in that single moment, before I said a word, every polite dismissal, every minimized achievement, every phase he branded my passion with, started to crumble without me lifting a finger. I could feel the weight of the room settle the moment I took the mic. Not the nervous kind. This was recognition, anticipation, the kind of silence people give when they already know they're witnessing something that's about to matter. I didn't start with thanks. I didn't start with names. I started with truth. When I was younger, I was told that what I loved wasn't a real career, that creativity was cute until it got in the way of something respectable, that designing worlds and coding experiences were distractions, not direction. That imagination had an expiration date. There were people in the crowd nodding, women, indie devs, young creators who'd heard their passions branded as phases or side hobbies. I wasn't just telling my story, I was telling theirs. I let the pause breathe before continuing. What some people still call games, with a shrug, have become one of the largest economic and cultural forces on the planet. We're not playing around. We're building universes, industries, jobs, solutions. Some of us create experiences that bring in more revenue than Hollywood blockbusters. Others use storytelling and code to teach, heal, and connect millions. My voice didn't waver, but there was a flicker of satisfaction, knowing exactly who might be watching, who might be realizing he'd dismissed the wrong daughter in the wrong era. I once overheard someone say, "I do computer games or something." I didn't correct them, not because they were right, but because I knew the day would come when I wouldn't have to explain what I do. It would speak for itself. The audience didn't clap yet. They were too locked in. So I kept going. Tonight isn't just about awards. It's about acknowledgement. Of every developer who was told to get a real job. Every designer whose work was treated like a distraction. Every kid who built something groundbreaking, while someone laughed over their shoulder. A few people in the front row rose to their feet before I even finished. Others followed. The applause crashed through the venue, like a wave rising on cue. And somewhere, maybe in his living room, or phone screen, or the silence of his pride, my father was facing a truth he could no longer downplay, with a shrug or a sentence that ended in, or something. I didn't need him to understand me anymore. The world already had. When the ceremony ended, my team and I stepped into the lobby, where the press waited. Lights bouncing off camera lenses, and excitement humming in every direction. I answered questions about design, leadership, accessibility in gaming, future tech partnerships. Topics my father never believed I had the range to speak on. Not once did I think about calling him. but the universe has a way of timing things. As I stepped aside to breathe, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a screenshot from a live group chat of my father's partners. They were reacting in real time to the broadcast. "Is that Dalton's kid? She's the founder of Nova Forge. She's working with Orion Interactive, the client we lost." No one mentioned computer games this time. An hour later, my father texted 2 words he'd never said to me before. "We should talk." Not congratulations, not apology, just the admission that the world he dismissed now outranked the one he worshipped. I didn't reply, because the truth was simple. My worth was never waiting on him to see it. I didn't build for his approval. I built because the future had room for me, even when he didn't. I'd stopped chasing the pride of people who underestimated me and started building alongside people who never did. That night, as I left the venue with my award in one hand and my team around me, I realized something important. Some people only recognize greatness when it's broadcast on a screen, wrapped in applause and undeniable. But the people who matter, and the ones you build with, saw it long before the spotlight ever found you. I didn't need to be introduced as his daughter anymore. He would now be introduced as my father.